I asked you to ask me your questions. I got them right here, and I got some answers for you. We've got some fun questions, and we have a lot, actually, of business questions. Let's dive right into these questions. The first one, it's a fun one. If you had to do all of your work with only two lenses, which ones and why? So I actually learned photography or portrait photography with really only two lenses to begin with. I learned with number one, the 24 to 70, which the camera is holding it right now on my R6 Mark II, adapted with an EF 24 to 70. I bought this lens back in May of 2016. So I quite literally learned portrait photography with that lens. And that was the second big lens I ever purchased. The first big lens I ever purchased was my biggest lens I still own today, the 70 to 200. Now, the reason why I would pick these two lenses is not necessarily because I learned with them, but because this would cover all of my bases for all of my regular work. As a portrait and wedding photographer, it would be pretty rare that I would need anything longer than 200 millimeters. This is quite long enough in every scenario I've been in so far. And number two, the 24 to 70, that's going to be wide enough to really capture anything that I would need to in any of my workflows. The 24 to 70 and the 70 to 200, both the 2.8 versions, so that I can get the most amount of light into that lens and the most amount of background blur, that would cover everything that I would need in my workflow. The next question is, do you have tips for buying a camera? I have a film camera, I have a film Canon and love it, but I get so intimidated by it. I haven't picked it up since having my kids. So tips for buying a camera. Buying a camera is a super personal journey for sure. And I think a good framework to think about buying a camera is number one, consider your budget. And then number two, consider what you're buying the camera for. If you're buying the camera to capture moments with the family, maybe vacations, or you go out to travel, things like that, capturing the moment and really documenting your family, you don't really need a camera that's going to break the budget. Whereas if you're buying a camera, say you want to photograph NASCAR or something hyper specific, maybe you're going to have to narrow down your selection that way. And when we think about budget, that's going to be super personal, right? This hobby really has no upper limit on how much you can spend. But if you narrow down your selection by what you want to shoot, that can really help inform what your budget might have to look like. I actually have a really good example of this. I have two versions of basically the same exact lens that gives me the same exact end result for my paying customers. This is the 100 millimeter macro 2.8 by Canon. This is the USM version. This one is a little bit more affordable for consumers, and this is the L version. This is the Pro version with the red ring that everybody loves and adores so much. And this one is the one with the gold ring, the USM. Don't judge me. I don't use caps on my lenses. But the moral of the story here, the whole point about budget. When I first started out, I really felt like I had to have this L lens, the more expensive version of it. It technically does have stabilization, so it does have a cool feature that this one doesn't have. But I was shooting macro photography with it. I didn't need stabilization. Now, the problem is that at the time, this lens was about $900, which was about $700 out of my budget. And my mentor really put me on game and really helped me understand. And she challenged me to buy this lens. She really tried to get it through to my thick skull that this was practically, meaning at the end result, the same lens as this one. It just doesn't look as cool. And not everybody talks about it like this one, so I don't really know much about this guy. And so she challenged me and said, buy it and see if it doesn't serve your purposes and see if you don't enjoy shooting with it. So I'm like, okay, I bought it, loved it. And the only reason why I have this one now is because I dropped it and broke it. And by the time I was ready to upgrade, I bought the L lens because I could. But that's what I mean by budget is a very personal thing. And at the time, I spent $200 on that used version of that macro lens, and I got the same pictures that I post today back when I very first got started, simply because I got the same exact lens, so to speak, in terms of function, because it has the full macro qualities, all those cool same features. It doesn't have image stabilization, but I knew that I didn't need image stabilization for the macro photography that I was doing. So that's why it's important when you're buying a camera, number one, to understand your own budget, and number two, list out what you know you want to shoot the camera for. The next question, tips for setting white balance accurately and how to shoot in harsh sunlight. Tips for shooting white balance. Number one, the thing that helped me out, especially in the beginning, was buying a gray card. That's another thing that my mentor originally had me start off with, is I would just go to places, I would set up a gray card, take a picture, and then I would set the white balance to the gray, and I would start learning what the different kelvins kind of look like. And so over time, by studying and doing it repeatedly and comparing that to the set kelvins that are already in the camera, like daylight and cloudy, and shade and tungsten and things like that, I started drawing all those different parallels between that and the white balance in the camera, and say the white balance of lights and things like that. And you just start drawing those associations over time. And in terms of shooting in harsh sunlight, if you're doing portraits and you can control any aspect of the environment, the biggest tip is don't shoot in harsh sunlight if it's not part of the vision that you have for what you're doing. Now, on the flip side of that, I do wedding photography, and I am very frequently in event photography, things like that, and journalism for different clients and things. And so because of that, I am frequently tasked with shooting in harsh sunlight, right? Just like you probably are. So my tips are, number one, just focus on shutter speed. Get that shutter speed super high. In harsh sunlight, sometimes I'm shooting up into 1/4000th of a second. And then other times, because my cameras can, I'm shooting at like 1/8000th of a second sometimes if it's super harsh. Now, that's also because I prefer to shoot with a large aperture or a low number on the f-stop. For example, I'm shooting this video at f2.8. So that's a large aperture or a low f-stop number. And in the harsh sunlight, I have to compensate with that somehow. So I have to use a super high shutter speed in harsh sunlight. So that's my biggest tip. And then in the edit, you would just raise the shadows as much as you can. But I try to shoot to preserve highlights in harsh sunlight. And in order to do that, I use a super high shutter speed. Now I got about 5 questions all kind of bouncing around the same kind of idea. And it's, how long did it take to get booking clients when you first started? And how did you kind of promote yourself to start getting clients once you started accepting payments? A lot of us all want to know the same thing. It's like, what does this journey kind of look like for different people? Now, this is what it looked like for me. I was first invited to my very first photography gig September 5th, 2015, and I was invited to second shoot for a photographer who would end up being my mentor. I quite literally fell in love with it, and it changed my life. And so I said, teach me everything that you know about portrait photography and wedding photography. I will learn everything. I went to every single gig that she let me go to with her. She never paid me a freaking dime for like almost anything, because I just wanted to learn everything that I could. So I tried to help her any way that I could. And I ended up getting my first paying client after that first gig 3 months later in December of 2015. So it took me about 3 months from my first gig to my first paid gig. Um, and the way I did it was I was just posting on Facebook. I got super hungry basically immediately. The very first time I took a picture of somebody and I showed it back to them, and they went, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" That feeling, it has never gotten old to me. And the way that I promoted myself was really all organically on Facebook. I would go do photo shoots for free. I'd reach out to tons and tons of people and do those free photo shoots. And then after those free photo shoots, I would go on Facebook and Instagram and I would talk about those photo shoots and I would tell stories about the people that I was taking pictures of. Because during the photo shoots and like during planning and stuff, like, we get to know each other and whatnot. And so that would inform a lot of what I would be talking about in the posts. And a lot of times it's like people in your local community, right? So like you're writing stories about people in your community. And so you can kind of take on the role a little bit of like reporter. And that becomes really fun because people want to know like what's going on, right? Because you're shooting all these interesting people that you're interested in and telling these fun stories, and then other people find it and they think that they should be photographed next, and then it kind of just spreads. I think a lot of it just comes down to like what you're talking about in your posts, because in my opinion, photographs don't sell photography, photographers do. And that's a bar, honestly. So I would tell these stories on these Facebook posts, and I would post them every day, not necessarily to get clients, but word would spread and people would get excited to read these stories because I don't know, like if I'm interested in these people that I'm taking pictures of, then like there's a high degree of likelihood that somebody else might be interested in these folks too. I don't know. I wasn't consciously thinking about it back then. I was just excited and posting, like, and that's kinda how I do it now still. I follow frameworks for writing and all that stuff, but I just kinda write about the stories that I have with the people that I take photos of. Another business question is how long did it take to build a steady clientele? I took my first paid gig in December of 2015, and I ended up leaving my job, that business consulting job, in October of 2017. So about 2 years, I ended up having a steady enough clientele to where it made sense for me to leave my corporate career. And another question that was really, really standing out a lot was like tips for marketing. And I think the best way to market yourself is to network locally and add value to the trusted mom and pop shops around your local city, around your local county, and like your surrounding cities and small towns. Especially if you want to do family photography or wedding photography, couples photography, if you want to be taking portraits of people, you want to be serving your local community of small businesses. That's the best way to market yourself as a photographer and to build clientele quickly. When your local community can physically see you in the wild and you're working and you're serving and they see your photos everywhere, oh my goodness. It is such like, oh, you don't get paid in exposure. That's the exposure you want. There's a lot of people that want to book clients on social media, and social media is a good way to find some clients. But in real life, as a local photographer, you are going to market yourself so much more effectively with boots on the ground marketing. So go to a local boutique, do a photo shoot with all of their clothing. Like do a free photo shoot with somebody and style it with all styling from that local boutique. Don't just send them the gallery and say, "Hey, here's some loose photos for you." No. Do something that is completely undeniable. Hang up physical prints in that boutique from your photo shoot. Like, and photograph that process. Take some behind the scenes process of you working with that local business and elevate that business's brand because of your photos. That's how you add value. Do that for a local barber. Do that for a local car wash. Do it. Do it for a florist. Do it for a coffee shop. Do it for every industry. And don't aim for the big boxes. Do your research. Find local businesses, and you can network with them by adding value. Do research. Look them up on their websites. Find where you can add value. This always, always, always returns to me tenfold. When I serve my local community and my local businesses, it always comes back to me big time. But you can't just DM them and ask them for a photo shoot. You have to just outright serve them and get noticed. It's hard work, but it works. So that's a little Q&A. Hopefully any of that made any sense. We'll try it again. We'll do some more of these. I'm James Young with James Young Photography. Let's keep it rolling. Like, ask more questions. Like, let's keep this going. I want to know more of your questions.